an all-season tourist attraction for the citizens of Casper and tourists. And so I don't know how we can look at doing that or what ideas can be thrown out, but I mean, they brought it up. I know it's been brought up in the past, so I think that's something that that I think the city really needs to look at, is making it a more year-round than just 3 months out of the year, 4 months out of the year.
Tim, there have been a bunch of discussions about that. You want to tell us a little bit about some of those, if you wouldn't mind?
Sure. It's kind of a, really when it comes to summer operations, it's kind of a blank canvas. And so we've tossed around a lot of ideas. I think the critical piece for us, though, is just trying to identify uses that don't increase the subsidy. And so that's kind of been the tough part where we're having trouble paring them down. But I think that what we'll end up doing, you know, if council wants, is we would come up with a menu of options and ideas, and then maybe an appropriate what we think it can make for revenue or possibly lose, increase the subsidy, and bring it before you and maybe have those conversations. But there are things that are currently going on, for example, building trails for mountain bikers and stuff like that, and hikers and the like. And so that's something that we've identified that we can do, you know, when we get time in the summertime to develop these trails, but it doesn't really add to the subsidy because it's just kind of come up, park in the parking lot, and go do some of those activities on the property. And so those are the ideas that right now we're doing because, you know, it's not going to increase the subsidy.
Because a lot of the other ideas involve operating the lift, right? And that's what costs money, is running the lift. And how do you schedule that and how much are you going to do with that? They've talked about putting a picnic area down below that people would go down to. And of course the zip line and other things.
Right.
Pretty pricey, but and then whether you keep the restaurant open, and do you have enough traffic to really justify that?
Don't know until you try, but I just, like I said, they brought it up. It's been brought up multiple times, so I just think it's something we need to look at. I like the idea of the menu idea.
I agree, though, that's the trend with ski areas, is to try to turn them into year-round venues. Thanks, Jim. If there's anything else, we'll move on to Fort Casper expansion. Carter, you going to tee this up for us?
Well, I'd be happy to, Mr. Mayor, but the individuals that were going to be here tonight to kind of speak to this haven't shown up yet. So maybe we could put just kind of push it down the agenda and go with some other items, if that's all right.
Now, do we have some folks here to talk about the downtown parking fines structure?
Similar thing. Can we give it a little time for those two items and see if we're ready for this one?
Okay.
If you'd like to tackle that.
Let's move on to 3 then.
All right. Sorry about that.
Wind River Washakie traffic concerns. We're a flexible group here, right?
I sure appreciate that. Well, good evening, everybody. Good to be with you tonight. This is an item that was brought to our attention a few weeks back with a citizen out in the from the floor, and since that time we've been looking into these concerns, and certainly I think a video accompanied this issue as well that we've passed around everybody. You probably noticed in your memo that this analysis here that the police department conducted in terms of over the last 7 years, I believe it was, what the accident rates have been and so on. And certainly while there have been some, it hasn't been an aggressively dangerous area of concern. Furthermore, I asked Andrew to look into this as well in terms of traffic conveyance, as to what ideas that he might have or would recommend to more safely facilitate traffic through there. And Andrew has a couple ideas that we would recommend and actually move forward with. But beyond that, tonight's purpose was really to give you some insights that we've collected. Again, some ideas from public services that we'd like to move forward with. And we'd certainly take any questions or feedback or do any other additional homework that you'd like to see happen. If it's okay with you, I can give a minute to the chief to kind of go over some of this data, and then a minute to Mr. Beamer to walk through his recommendations and go from there, if that's all right.
Chief. Mayor, Council, thank you. So we were asked to take a look at it and see if there's a problem that is worth addressing. The map that's in your packet today contains 7 years worth of data. You can see that this main Walls Drive corridor, the traffic volumes that are going to be persistent on that, establishes a whole lot more crashes than we're getting on Wind River. It was significant to me when I looked at 5 years worth of data that none of those occurred during non-winter months of the crashes on Wind River. So I've drawing the conclusion that during the school year we certainly get more traffic. It is used. We've verified that through our traffic enforcement. The police officers are finding that the high school students are using it as a less congested way to exit from the high school area to get onto 2nd Street. There's not a large volume of it, but it does happen. But all of these crashes occurred during the winter season. It's very consistent with icy roads, the conditions on an icy road. Many of the few existing ones were hit and runs, minor crashes that, car came out and they're parked on the road and their mirror got knocked off during the night, and weren't able to follow up on it. As we were looking at the data and trying to absolve ourselves of the concerns of the citizens, that there's too high of a frequency of crashes, we realized that some of these side streets did not have controlled intersections. In other words, as is the natural course of this roadway is to go in a north and south direction, the ones that are proceeding from these east and westbound side streets, many of those intersections were not controlled. So as somebody had the normal ability to go the speed limit here, somebody could pull out unawares, having not come to a complete stop to verify the safety of it. So in conjunction with the streets department, we believe that it is appropriate to put stop signs on those side streets, and I think that process is already underway. So overall, we do have crashes on there, but it's consistent with just a normal crash pattern. There's no obvious engineering flaws in it that are leading to any crash, enhanced crash problems. You do have the north and south natural flow, and we would want to keep it that way.
Questions for Chief? Steve?
I'm trying to remember, I don't believe there are any traffic control north-south, is that it?
There's not.
Okay.
It's
I was
not really
thinking that was-
designed as an arterial.
It's
It's a residential street that's being used as an arterial, essentially.
So look at what happens when we try to solve these problems. We make some people happy, and then I have people calling up. They don't like the stop sign that we just put in there. But this is the design of this plat of our community is designed to give that flow of traffic.
Mike?
So, Chief, could you comment, I think somebody, the guy that was complaining about that, or somebody was talking about speed bumps that I absolutely abhor. If there's nothing that I stop on this council, it's the installation of a traffic hazard like a speed bump. I would consider that a great
And a
legacy.
plowing
if I
hazard.
could leave that. But anyway, though, do four-way stops have any speed control effectiveness in that kind of an area that you're aware of? Because with that, by making some of those intersections stop all the way around, what's that going to do to that
So
traffic?
we looked at that. We discussed that. It is contrary to established best practices to use stop signs as speed control devices. We just transfer traffic problems when we do that. So we did look at it. It would not be my recommendation that we install a three-way stop on this, roughly speaking, in the middle of the block. What I would, in a residential area of this type, what that encourages is people, I think I've got I think I realize nobody's coming, so I'm just gonna go through it. And I have intersections in the town. I can go park there in my plain vehicle and show you just how frequently that happens. And so when that happens, I actually increase the traffic crashes. So in my opinion, this does not warrant a three-way stop on any of these intersections. We're keeping the design of the roadway, and it absolutely, you're seeing 7 years worth of data. All of those are likely weather related and typically minor in the severity of them.
Okay, Thank you.
Ken?
One of the things that he mentioned was also the speeding that goes through there, and I know we have that issue everywhere in town, but he didn't just mention about the accident, he talked about the amount of people that just speed through that. That's what he was talking about, speed bumps or dips or something to slow the traffic down, not just because of accidents, but because people just racing through that section because there is nothing to slow anybody down.
So, Councilman, thank you for a great point. If I can respond to that, we need to be able to collect data on this. However, when this subject arose, we also were hit with some persistent winter weather. So while we're trying to deal with winter weather, I cannot get my collection data out there. I'll be able to better respond to that in the future. Once I'm able to collect that data, I need clean roadways and unobstructed views to facilitate that, and I'll be able to respond to that in a scientific, knowing, educated response later on.
Chief, would it be accurate to say that in a residential area, it's really common for people to believe that a car is going faster than it actually is?
Mayor, that's kind of a loaded question.
Well, I guess would you agree that that's common?
I would tell you that in my experience, that is very frequent. I've been known to take an outdated radar speed detection device that we no longer can lawfully use and loan it out to neighborhoods like this where they find out that really they themselves, because sometimes they don't believe my data either. I give them the speed detection device, and it turns out that again, as Andrew has often reported, we believe in that consistent national standard of the 85th percentile, and I would bet that there might be during the lunch hour rush to leave the high school, we might have the occasional speeder. But given the nature of the roadway, this is a roadway that does not lend itself to, it's not wide, it doesn't have good visibility on those intersections, so the natural human tendency with cars parked on the side of the road is to not speed. I think the roadway design is adequate for a neighborhood, but I think the average driver, and there will always be aberrations to this, but the average driver is not going to feel comfortable speeding excessively. But I'll be able to, as soon as we can clear up these roadways, I can get my data collecting equipment out there. We did park it's very hard to make everybody happy. So I did park a speed trailer out there and was immediately complained upon that it was taking up a parking space. So it's very hard for me to, and that's not slighting the citizen that was their concern. I have to park it someplace, and so it's very hard to get good data through the way I'm doing it. I have to get that good collection devices out there when the roads are clear.
I thought the cops always made everybody happy.
No, that's your job.
We try.
Any other questions for Chief, and then we'll move on to Andrew, right? Is that the plan?
Please, yeah.
Okay, thank you, Chief. Andrew?
Mr. Mayor, Council, I'm not sure I can add anything to anything that the Chief has just said. Certainly we do have uncontrolled intersections on Wind River, but on the west side, also going on to Forest Drive. So we're going to address all the uncontrolled intersections on both Wind River and Forest. And again, stop signs are not used to control speed, but they are used to simply control traffic. And there's a real disconnect sometimes between controlling traffic and controlling speed. And again, we were trying to get speed data too, but then we got the snow, and speed data on icy, snowy roads doesn't mean a whole heck of a lot. So we need to get some clear roads before we can get some good speed data out there.
Any questions for Andrew?
Sorry, I don't have mine pulled up, if I may, Mayor. Just out of curiosity, is there no stop signs right through this section? Is this just a straight shot like this one here?
Forest Drive, for Forest you have to stop on Swanton. which is
Yep.
right there, yes. So if you're on Forest, you have to stop to get onto Swanton Avenue.
Okay, so if you have to stop there,
Yes.
because I was just wondering, this is almost like right in the middle of the two, a three-way stop sign right there would not benefit that street in any way. It wouldn't help, it wouldn't do anything.
And again, stop signs are used to control traffic, not speed.
Right.
So for that to be an effective three-way stop, you would have to have almost equal legs of traffic on all three legs of that T intersection. Was that Gannett you were pointing at, or Washakie?
Washakie.
Washakie simply does not have that traffic line to make that feasible.
Anything else for Andrew? Okay. Well, anything we should do, council, with this? Sean?
I think we just wait till the weather gets better and look at the speed data and decide from there.
Okay. Revisit this in, what, 5 months, 6 months? You were the one who got the complaint, right?
Yeah, I would
Steve?
just see if we can revisit it prior to school. Because it seems to me like this is a school issue more so than anything. I think that road probably gets traveled. More of our instances are coming up from kids leaving. This summer, I think you'll find probably no issue at all.
So maybe like late April, early May.
Mayor,
Technically.
if I may, I would highly recommend that I get you the data you need for this spring and immediately follow up after school has been released for the summer. We get a baseline data also so that we have something to compare to it. There is an absolute trend of December, January, February crashes on that. That's by far and away the vast majority of them. So I think you have increased traffic with the school, but I think a lot of this is weather related, which is very hard for me to control. And we will have speed enforcement. We've already been doing speed enforcement there, trying to help these citizens out that have concerns. And a couple of the students that we've had contact with indicated that the reason why they're using that roadway is they go down Walsh Drive, but it clogs up, but at the end, and there's a long waiting period, and they're trying to avoid that, stuck in that intersection, so they're looking for ways to avoid that.
Go ahead, Steve.
If I could just do a follow-up question too, and you may not know this, but of those accidents that take place, are they mainly during the daytime? Is it during school hours?
That's a great question, and I did not dig that deep.
Mike?
Well, I just wanted to make sure if I understood. I thought I understood that that the city was gonna install stop signs on the east-west side streets that come in there. Did I
Well, that's the
understand
issue
that?
in front of us, I think, is whether that's helpful, because Andrew's pointing out that that's not necessary if there isn't a sufficient traffic volume, right?
There are a number of intersections in this town that are what we refer to as uncontrolled. There is no traffic control on any leg. And generally, I don't like those types of intersections. I want to control traffic on at least one leg of that intersection. So we will be putting stop signs up that are uncontrolled now that are going onto Wind River or going onto Forest. So those will no longer be what I refer to as uncontrolled intersections. Even though state law says you need to treat those as a yield sign, people generally don't. People on the main route go, I've got the right of way, you better stop.
So, Mr. Mayor, to be clear, that is moving forward. We're gonna go ahead and put those stop signs up.
Thanks for clarifying that.
So, and sort of, and you know, I don't believe in doing things just for show. And frankly, I don't consider that putting these stop signs up is just for show. But I do like the idea of demonstrating to those folks in that area that we're doing something. You know, that we're not just, oh, we'll put this off and blow you off until next year.
Well, the real solution is to not have open campuses, so kids aren't rushing from 12th Street to 2nd Street to get to KFC and then rushing back to get to class on time because they don't leave the building in the first place. But that's just me.
Go back to neighborhood
You'll get a thumbs up
schools.
here.
Some concertina wire around the school too.
So, let's see, did I see Mr. Schickish? There you are.
You need a few more minutes to get yourself
I'm
composed, or
ready
you ready to go?
I'm ready to go.
All right, let's talk about Fort Casper then. Are you?
Yes,
you-
thank you, Mayor. Well, hello, councilwomen, councilmen. As you know, I'm Michael Shekich, and I've been in touch with you either directly or indirectly with the aspect of tripping drug. And so to bring you current, as you all may remember, the city council before you essentially entered into an agreement where they took possession and ownership of the tripping drug, what constitutes that collection. And in return, the city is going to display it in some capacity, but in the corporate museum display capacity by January of 2022. And it is deemed to be a part of the city's permanent collection, and it's to maintain it and to curate that museum, that collection. So the issue we run into is, okay, well, how does this happen? And you know, the logical thing ultimately is to increase the footprint of Fort Casper to make room for this collection. I think as a practical matter, it's also going to kind of grow beyond just the Tripany drug to more of early Casper, of which Tripany drug would be kind of an anchor or a cornerstone of what early Casper looked like. Now, a preservation committee was formed, and I think you'll probably know a lot of the people on there. Mike Sullivan's on it, George Bryce is on it, Bill McDowell's on it, Bart Ray, Pinky and Jackie Ellis, Jim Anderson, Dana Dool, Bob King, Ann Rochelle, my mother, my sister, myself, and others. And we have started the process of doing fundraising to make this viable, because I know one of the concerns the council has is, okay, great idea, how do we make it work? What we've done so far is the Tripany Shippage family has agreed to pledge $150,000 as the seed money to start this process, so that it's a real ongoing entity, because often the hardest thing is the initial input. Rick Young has received an anonymous grant or gift of $50,000 in this regard, so we're up to 200. I'm completing some grants. We've got one into the Goodstein Foundation right now. They closed this week, so I don't have a result for you, but I know it's being considered by the Goodstein Foundation. And there will be a grant, I think it's used this year, but there is the Business Council, Wyoming Business Council does a community enhancement grant every year of $500,000. I believe this year it's going to be used in capacity, I don't know this for sure, Carter I'm sure will let us know, in conjunction with the river expansion. But I think next year it might be an appropriate thing to consider including the Fort Casper addition under that grant. It's not a guarantee. And we're working diligently with other grants. So I would like to reframe the way this has kind of come. I think this is a great opportunity. The council's already made the decision that this is a collection worth having and preserving. You've got someone here who's willing to take the lead in the fundraising. We've had some success starting in the fundraising. I want you to know about that success, and I want to let you know that we're going to keep you advised on what's happening with it. And I'd like to be able to come back to you in the spring and revisit with you what we've done and where we still need to go. The bottom line on this is that if it's successful, the city of Casper and this council will receive a new building and a good collection with little to no serious or significant expense on your part. But it's going to require that we revisit that, I think, in the spring with you, so we have some hard numbers to give you as well. So I guess what I'm more than doing anything is advising you where we are. I'd like to have your blessing to continue in this direction, and we'll keep you advised on the fundraising as we move forward. We haven't gone public. Our goal is to raise a critical mass and then take it public in the next phase of that. Any questions?
Questions for Michael?
First things first, congratulations, $200,000 is a really big deal
Thank you.
in fundraising. Next question, do we remember what the total estimated cost of the addition was? Sorry, I know we've discussed it, I don't.
$1,200,000.
$1,200,000, thank you.
Questions for Michael, comments? I just appreciate you folks taking the lead on this, and it's a great resource, probably an underutilized resource for Casper, and having this collection will make it even more attractive, so. And I suggested to Michael that we do this in the spring because that's when we do budgets, and
Yep.
if we do have to add something to make this happen, that would be the time we could look and see what position we're in and whether we can help. Hopefully you can raise it all, and then we need to worry about that.
Well, then I'll disappear and you guys will wonder what happened to Michael Sherman.
When it does kind of time, I hope council will truly look, if we need to help them out, I really hope that we do, because one thing I look at is our museums is a tourist attraction, and one of our biggest thing is to draw tourists in, and this is just one more way for us to get tourists here to see, as he mentioned, this is the start of the history of Casper, business-wise, and to see it develop even into something more, and for tourists to come and see that, I think is something I hope council will take serious and get behind him even more so. So, I am huge about supporting this.
Thank you very much. I want you to know, 65 to 70% of all people who visit Fort Casper are non-Casper residents, that are outside the city of Casper. So,
Anything more that you would need as a sign of support, other than us just giving you a thumbs up that we're behind this and it goes into our minutes? Is there
sure, it's
some
like
kind
a
of
large donation of money.
some kind of because you're going to people to say the
Just
city.
go check.
I mean, the purpose of this today, obviously, is so Micah can go to the potential donors and say, the city's gonna wants this to happen and supports it, and, you know, may contribute at some point down the road. So if you give this money, it's going to happen, rather than it might happen.
That is the chicken and egg problem that I faced. And I think it would be much easier on the fundraising if I were able to represent the people that the city has I don't remember the phrase, but a serious commitment and interest in this project, and is holding that with attention. I don't know the quite phrase, but if we get close enough to critical mass, I'll come back to the city and talk to you what that might be. But people want to know it's not just kind of a hope, an aspiration. I think with what we're getting, so if the city could, I don't know how you would do that maybe?
Well, I mean, we could go as far as passing a resolution that we support this fundraising effort and appreciate the efforts
That'd be
of
very
this
helpful.
group, and that we will, that we're committed, to use your word, to the expansion of the Fort Casper Museum. Would that,
That'd be very
help you?
helpful. You're all comfortable with that.
How do you all feel about that? Because it does kind of commit us at some point to, you know, possibly a financial contribution at some point if they come up short. Steve?
Doesn't the MOU pretty well spell that out, that we are going to do that by 2022?
Yeah, it's the problem is, how are you gonna do it? There isn't really enough space to do what's there. So how do we do it? And this, I think, it would be a great opportunity for the council. I mean, I think the council showed a lot of vision willing to take on the exhibit, the collection. This is a chance to bring it to completion, I think. George Bryce tells me it's not that hard to raise this much money. Of course, George is in Arizona and I'm here. Let's do it.
Actually, Florida, but.
Okay, so, I think we need to do this to make it work. And I think it'd be really great if the council would make some resolution in support of that concept.
Because the MOU commits us to displaying it, but it doesn't commit us to an expansion of the museum, right?
That's correct.
Bob?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd be in support of a resolution, and granted, we don't have an exact funding source at this point, but I think the fact that we have put on record a resolution that says we support the idea or the concept of it, that gives these guys something they can go out and say, look, we've got the city behind us. That makes it a lot easier for them to do a silent fundraising campaign, if you will. And it just kind of puts us out on a horse, you know, so. I don't think that's beyond all.
And publicizes the effort as well, so. How do you all feel? Is everybody okay with us drafting a resolution to support this? I think we got unanimous here, Michael.
Well,
So-
thank you very much.
So we would, could we prepare that for our next meeting?
I'll ask Mr. Cortez to put pen to paper and make that happen.
All right.
Well,
You
thank
guys
you
can
very
be in
much.
contact if there's any question about what it needs to say.
If I
Okay?
can assist you in any way, let me know.
Thank you.
Happy to do that.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you for coming, and thanks
Thank
for all
you.
your effort.
Thank you.
Okay, should we continue to defer the downtown parking and go on to utility rates? Okay, let's go on to utility rates then.
Alrighty. Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Pursuant to the policies that you recently have adopted and you know, kind of the practice that we've taken on over the last 3 years or so, this is the time of year where we need to evaluate the rates for our enterprises and our utilities. This particular time, however, would be the period of time where we set the rates ostensibly for the next 2 years with an interim review this time next year. So we're kind of on a 2-year program, if you will, with the commitment that every year we will check it out and see if the data is coming in like we thought it would, and if not, what adjustments we need to make and those kinds of things. So that's a general sort of overview, and with the understanding that right now we're at the beginning, if you will, of that two-year cycle. The other thing that we do in preparation for these discussions is we do visit with our advisory groups where they exist and are potentially active. In this scenario, we have been working with the CPU Advisory Board that gives us insight and recommendations and so on for the water and the sewer utilities. Furthermore, as you all know, we have the Regional Water Board that we work in partnership with as well, where they give us a lot of insight into what their plans are, and that's obviously really critical for us because we're one of their bigger customers. In fact, we're the biggest customer that they have of all the districts and so forth in the area. And so those things, those pieces of feedback have filled in a lot of the blanks for us that we'd like to go over with you tonight. So if it pleases the council, I'd like to go through each of the funds that support our utilities, give you the recommendations that we are offering, take any questions that you have, review the various dynamics that we think influence these behaviors, and then go from there with whatever direction that you might take on.
Everybody wants to hear, so.
All right.
Go for it.
Excellent. Let's go ahead and start with the water fund here. As you can see, we have two variations that we're looking at with respect to the water fund. And for those of you who may not be familiar with this pro forma model, I'll just real quickly go over a couple of features. This red line here is located at 0, and it means just that. If we have this blue line trending in this direction, then we are trending towards a no money, no funding type scenario, because the 0 and the red line here would tell you that you're going into broke territory, okay? Here is kind of the demarcation, if you will, this black line of where we're at as it relates to our reserves. So you can ostensibly understand that everything here would tell you what we have by way of reserves for the water fund. The water fund reserve is set at the point where we have 90 days of operation, as well as funding set aside for a year's worth of capital depreciation, and in some cases even, I think it's a year's worth of as well for debt service payments also, where debt exists in each of these funds. So in my estimation, that's a pretty conservative policy approach to establishing this black line here. And as you might imagine, any forays below this line would hopefully be planned and temporary and something you would expect to see. The green line here is really meant to represent sort of a buffer, if you will, between the normal operating condition of the fund and the space that we hope to stay above as it relates to being away from this black line here. So in my opinion, anything you've got operating up here is really kind of an ideal operating condition, because you're not threatening the reserves, and you're certainly not getting into the point where you're looking at some real significant funding capability and that kind of thing. So that's the major features of this model. Down here we have some of the data, the representative data, that would suggest major implications as it relates to the activity, in this case, of the water fund. And then over here on this side, you can see kind of what we're looking at as it relates to any variations with respect to the prior year. And obviously that gives you an indication of what we're looking at as far as fee increases are concerned and everything else. This, by the way, represents about a 10% margin of favorability above our reserves. And so council, of course, always has the opportunity to push that up or push it down or whatever. You will notice over here, as it relates to demonstrating what the CPU advisory board is suggesting, that green line is totally gone. And so they have gotten to the point of saying, why do we even need a green line? Why do we need even a buffer to be built into the model, in this case, as it relates to water rates that we would be assessing the community? My suggestion would be that if indeed we remove the green line and take away that sort of 10% margin of favorability there, we then run the risk and sort of the temptation of driving this blue line down toward the reserves. And with that comes the risk of seeing the operations hover around the black line, which in my estimation brings the reserves into the operating activity of the fund. To me, that becomes a little more speculative, particularly when you consider that water and sewer are funds that are largely dependent upon consumption on a year-to-year basis in order to make that fund work. And as you all know, that consumption can be based upon a summer that has a lot of rain and therefore not much need for purchasing water, or in our case, when we're in the water selling business, a dry summer where purchase of water is favorable to us, albeit expensive to the residences who may want to keep their grass green and so on. So I prefer and would recommend that, with all due respect to the CPU advisory board, that we keep the green line intact so that we're not seeing the activity of this blue line hovering around the reserve demarcation, but rather around this margin instead. I don't like the idea of pulling reserves into operational activity and sort of using that as a counterbalance to what might happen from year to year, compared to using this buffer in that capacity instead. So from that standpoint, that would be my sort of major difference, if you will, with regard to what I'm proposing to you compared to what it is that the CPU advisory board would suggest. Now, that does have some impact with respect to the differences that you would see as it relates to the actual rate increases. But in my opinion, those differences are negligible enough to where I just don't see any major advantage to going in this direction. Assuming for a second that you are okay with this, let's talk about water here for a minute. If you could pull this up a little further, Tom. We are suggesting for the next couple of years a 2 and 3% increase in the water fund. You can see that right now we are looking at a 1% increase that we're currently embracing right now. But for the next year, we are suggesting that this be our path forward. You will also recall that we are using $2.5 million from 1% 16 to help offset some of that capital burden that would otherwise be borne exclusively by the rate modeling. This has been very, very helpful for us in that we have been able to improve the rate at which we replace water infrastructure. At this point in time, we are just over a 0.4% replacement rate annually, which, as you can imagine, is not entirely aggressive, but it is much, much better than what it was since we've been able to incur this help from 1%. I will tell you that we are building, with this rate increase, a little more by way of infrastructure replacement so that we can continue to stay on top of the aging infrastructure and some of the more vulnerable conditions that parts of our water system is enduring right now. But the other thing that you're also seeing in this increase is with regard to what it is we're anticipating from Regional Water. They have suggested that for the next couple of years that we can expect about a 3% increase with respect to the water they sell us, that we in turn, of course, sell to our customers. And so that particular increase is hard to get around because it's such a major portion of what it is that we spend money on in this fund. So it would seem to me, with regard to what we're seeing in terms of a fairly modest increase over time, which looks like, you know, around $1 a month for our residential, our typical residential customer, to not be too overwhelming as a consideration. I definitely like the path that this blue line is on, and as you know, that is really contingent upon moderately successful selling seasons for us as it relates to selling water to our citizens and so on. A bad year of consumption, say a very wet year, can push this, you know, all over the board. So we are making some relatively moderate assumptions, and we're anticipating a very small network growth overall to help bring some additional revenue into the picture. Okay, so that's the water fund. Any questions at all about this?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have several.
Okay.
The black line,
Yes.
is that black line including capital expenses such as tank mixer replacement, internal recoating of tanks, that type of thing? Are those things figured into your black line? And then is the 1% fund transfer basically being used for line replacement of the old lines?
To answer your question in reverse order, if I may, Mr. Mayor, Councilman, this is nearly exclusively being dedicated to line replacement. We brought this in as a request a couple years ago so that we could ramp up and improve the rate by which we are replacing water lines. So absolutely.
Okay.
As it relates to your previous question about the black line here, I would say that the black line probably does not represent capital expense like some of the things that you mentioned. I would suggest that you would see those capital expenses show up here in the blue line with regard to expenses that we're anticipating from year to year and over time. So if we're anticipating a relining of a tank or whatever, we would have that built into our matrix that helps us understand where our expenses are going to be with respect to whatever fiscal year that might be. So you would probably see that reflected more here than you would in here. Okay? Andrew, does that sound fair to you? Bruce? Okay.
And that's why, excuse me, that's why I was asking that question, is because I don't see any bumps in the black, the green, or the blue line, and I would expect those bumps to be in there, and not necessarily a tank mixer, those aren't that expensive.
Right.
But if you take down one of our big tanks, like our 1,000,000-gallon tank that we're talking about, that's gonna be a blip on one of those lines. And that's what bothers me, is we're looking now out 5 years, 6 years, and I would think that some of those things should be coming along. And I guess that's where I would really have to go along with you keeping the green line, because the other model has no room for that at all. And at least in this, there is that room. But as we have talked before, people don't understand that when they hear us say we're spending reserves for a tank mixer replacement, we're actually taking money out of our savings account that we have built in. And so I would expect that black line to have some increases in it when those big projects come along, rather than it being just a constant line. So that's why I was wondering how accurately the graph is really reflecting our true rate model.
Mr. Mayor, if I could respond to that, Councilman Cathy, I think you're right on the money as it relates to what we try to project and anticipate and everything else. And the reason that you're not seeing that here is because, for example, one of the water tanks that we hope to replace, we hope will be offset by money that we can get from the state. And so you won't see a huge downward pressure on this line as a result of that, because we think we're going to be able to get revenue in that will help us offset those kinds of expenses. Now, when we get to the bale fill, however, you're going to see wide variation. Okay. Because indeed, but you'll see it here in the blue line more so than any of these others. Mostly because the blue line is more reflective of expense issues that we have going on that doesn't really impact what our savings kinds of goals are with regard to the black line. But I can't guarantee that as we move forward and as other bigger projects come online, that this blue line will look as smooth as you see here. One of the things that we have noticed here is over the past few years, we have sucked up a lot of the balance that we would have here in the form of buying capital and projects and so on, that has winnowed the amount of money that we've had in the balance, because we were trying to use those dollars to deal with capital issues that we didn't have state grants or whatever to offset.
And I'm assuming the state money you're talking about will be in the form of a grant rather than a loan?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, in the sewer fund, however, we will talk about that for one of our major projects that we have coming up. But yes, we are in pursuit of grants, although I can't guarantee that we'll have that success with every project we try to pursue for those dollars.
Okay, and then Bob.
2 questions. Maybe I'm not smart enough to understand this, and I apologize if I am. So we're looking at raising the cost 1% every year to apply, or for the next 2, we're going 1% to 3%. Right. But yet our blue line is going downwards instead of going up. So I guess I'm a little confused on how we're raising rates to help with that, but yet we're still going down into 2024.
I'd like to show you what happens if we don't incur those rate increases. And so, Tom, while you're working on that, I'll try to talk a little bit about the dynamic that you're seeing here, because what you're seeing is that despite the fact that we're seeing, hopefully a 1% increase in revenue with this fund and what it is that we're recommending, we're also suggesting that we will have capital costs and operational costs and so forth that will suck in that margin of additional revenue to the extent that you won't see this line go up because of those rate increases. So in other words, if you give me $5 more, I probably have $5 or $6 more of expense that will kind of consume those overages. And so when you take out the increases here, you can see what happens unless we do something with regard to the capital that we would otherwise be spending. So without those increases, we start to see our line plummet pretty quickly. And if council were to say, let's not do increases, then we would have to say, well, we've got to do something about the expenses in order to avoid this sort of tumbling off the scale of our pro forma behavioral curve.
My other question is, for the previous 2-3 years, has it just stayed at one, we just increased it, just kept it at the 1%? Or has it been constantly increasing every year, from like 2017, 18, 2018 and 19? I mean, what are we like aggressively increasing? Are we staying normal? I guess is my question, because I don't see the previous years of how we've, I guess, increased or not increased or what.
Sure. Councilman, Mr. Mayor, what I could say here is that the history, as near as I can tell, and certainly Bruce and Andrew can speak to this much more cleanly than I can, has been to take the approach of smaller incremental increases over time than compared to no increases with sort of a balloon increase after, say, year 3 or year 4 of no increases happening. So what you're seeing is kind of a philosophical approach to managing this fund, utilizing smaller, more even incremental approaches to rate increases over time versus a big increase following 0 increases for a period of years.
Which is how our expenses work. They go up gradually. They don't go up all at once.
Right.
Steve? No, I'm sorry, Bob was waiting. Excuse me.
Yeah, we're gonna take these one at a time and decide whether to go forward on that rate increase, or we're gonna do them all at once.
Whatever you'd like to do.
Well,
I think if we're talking water, I thought it might be easier to talk about, get the water rate done.
yeah,
And
well, that's fine.
if that's
Well,
okay.
But let's stay with that until we're sure
Yeah,
everyone's
the
comfortable.
other, then I still got a question or two. I guess it's more of a comment. Looking at what we're gonna use 1% funds for, that really is, in my opinion, a really good investment, because by and large, we're replacing cast iron lines with plastic lines that are gonna last a lot longer. So we're getting better value out of using 1% money that way. And the idea of having a little cush between the black line and the green line, I think that just makes absolute sense. Our overall goal in our utilities is have the ratepayers pay the way.
Right.
And it's not like we're wasting money. We are investing to have a system that isn't gonna crash. So I would just like to proceed along the lines that you have suggested. Thank you.
A question, maybe you can answer this, Andrew. What percentage of our system is still cast iron? Can you give us a rough idea?
Mr. Mayor, Council, we've got an awful lot of cast iron still in North Casper and some of the older neighborhoods of town. I don't know if I have a good percentage, Bruce, do you know? I'm gonna guess maybe 15% still is cast iron in our system. But we still have an awful lot of ductile iron, and we still do put ductile iron pipe in the ground, but we are transitioning to the majority of PVC pipe, there's no doubt.
And nice to hand that off to the future council where they don't have to worry about this stuff because it's all done. So, Steve?
2 things, and one of them would be directed a little bit about what you just said, is our new PVC actually winds up with less leakage over time at the joints than what the old ductile or cast iron. Is that a?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, yeah, if you take a look at the old cast iron, you'll see generally it's pitting out at the service connection, because you've got the cast iron and you usually get a copper service, and that dialysis is working there. And we've got highly corrosive soils in this community, anywhere other than North Casper, which is what,
Yeah.
so.
But that's one thing too, is that with that $2.5 million a year and those line replacements, we are actually reducing our wastewater, which is due to the leakages at all of the joints through the piping. So that helps us. The other thing though that mentions, you're concerned about why the blue line was dropping. If you look at the projected revenue and the budgeted expenses, our coming year, we're only projecting 13 million in round numbers, and we're gonna spend 21 million. So we're chewing up that fund balance, and that's why that's coming down. And at some point, those two numbers have to start balancing out, and that's why those rate increases need to keep coming. But in answer to your question, that's why that blue line's dropping. So we're spending more than what our revenue is.
Mostly from a capital standpoint.
Yes,
Yep.
exactly. Doing what I was asking about, if capital was budgeted into any of those lines.
Exactly. Exactly right.
With reference to the green line, and I agree that I think it's really important to keep that there so that we have a point of reference. But my only question, and I don't know which one of you guys would be in the best position to answer this, is are we comfortable that the factors that are going into determining where that green line is on this graph are really realistic, that we're not overinflating or undervaluing that? Are we really comfortable with where that line's being established?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, the fact is that this particular margin is extremely subjective. If you wanted to see a wider margin, say 15%, which is some of what I've seen in the past, that really is just a mathematics question that gives you that point of reference that you described earlier with regard to our relationship to dipping into reserves. So for me, 10% is just well, it's a point of reference, like you said, and we can manipulate that however you think might be appropriate.
Well, and maybe to follow up on that, you know, sometimes you'll hear something that, for instance, a family should have 6 months worth of savings or something like that. Is there any data in the utility world that says, okay, this is how much of a buffer zone you should have? Is that,
I might be able to help a little bit with that. The thing we're looking at here is plant replacements, and the plant is a plant. It's a physical structure, and from an engineering standpoint, we pretty much know how long things are going to last. You can predict when you're going to have to put new pumps in, put new bearings in, so that the plant itself is actually a pretty predictable animal. And so I think the 10% gives me confidence that we know enough about running or our people know enough about running the plant, but I think it's pretty, 10%'s okay.
well, and I'm comfortable with that number too, but I'm just thinking if someone were to come along and criticize that as being too high or too low, that we'd be able to defend that and say that, no, we're not just plucking a number out of the sky there.
Historically, we've been able to maintain the plant with our current approach. We made sure all the redundancies are in place. Go ahead, Carter.
Mr. Mayor, I think to get to the heart of what Councilman Huber might be talking about, I would certainly say that the placement of the black line is probably more at the heart of what you might be looking for. Because again, we have 90 days of operating revenue squared away, not being touched at all in this model right here. Furthermore, we also have a year's worth of capital depreciation on top of that. Additionally, we have a year's worth of debt service payments captured in this margin right here. So to me, the question is probably more salient as it relates to where we're set here and what it is that the industry would say about dollars you have set aside to manage the fund. Because invariably, at some point in time, we may need to dip into here in order to cover a big project that's coming along with regard to a water tank, or we'll say that that grant doesn't come through from the state. We could really be getting hit hard, and that blue line will reflect that. So I'd say the industry would probably have much more to comment with regard to this than with regard to this.
Steve?
What is the contingency that we put on most of our capital projects? Isn't it a 10% contingency? And to me, that's your justification for the green line over the black line. Is the black line, if you were to plot a month to month, similar to what we do with revenue, you would see our month to month expenses bouncing back and forth above and below that black line. That green line gives you your 10% contingency on those expenses, just like we do on any capital project. So I think if you wanted a good justification for why that's there, that's our 10% contingency on our day-to-day operating expenses.
And just a comment on the approach. I mean, I'm sure there are other municipalities that defer maintenance and wait till something breaks. And I appreciate that our approach is very different, and that we have a schedule, as Bob says, and that we make sure that this system is operational and their backups are in place, so that we have a high degree of confidence that we're delivering good water to people, and that we will be able to do that, and there will be no hiccups or interruptions.
Right.
And that's what could be more critical for a city to do than that. So, are you all okay with this approach then? Okay.
Oh, absolutely.
Let's go on to the next part of this, Carter.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. I appreciate your support there. Let's talk about the sewer fund here. In a similar sort of demonstration, we have what the CPU advisory board has recommended and what it is that we are recommending with regard to the sewer fund. You can see that our glide path is really not too different, with the exception that it sounds like the CPU advisory board would like to see us hover around the reserve demarcation, and we're suggesting that we don't do that. That instead we hover around the margin of favorability there. The sewer fund is quite a bit different. We are suggesting a bigger, relative increase, if you will, with regard to the year-to-year rate increases in the sewer fund than we were talking about the water fund. And that's a large part because we have some fairly significant expenses that we have on our horizon in the sewer fund than we do with what we manage in the water fund. In the sewer fund, we do deal with plant repairs and some of those major projects that we're looking for help with in the modeling that we are trying to demonstrate here to you. You'll note that some of the dollars that we will be putting forward over time will deal with the interceptor project that we have coming up. That is an $8 million big project that we're trying to fund through the proceeds of this fund specifically. You'll remember that we've been approved, right, Andrew, with regard to a state program that actually allows for 25% forgiveness with this loan program that we're going through to get that interceptor project done. That's really good news. That's a big piece, and for an $8 million project, as you all know, that's a $2 million principal forgiveness piece. It's not for free, obviously, that remaining portion, and so we have built over time that debt service to get that project complete and that repair done. So that's a huge piece of the puzzle for us, in particular as it relates to our distribution system, if you will.
Steve?
In the water fund, we were using that $2.5 million for line replacement.
Mm-hmm.
What do we have specifically? Yeah, there you go. You're already on top of where
That's
I was
it.
going.
Yep.
Do you have anything specific you're looking at trying to upgrade, or with that $500,000 a year?
That also is line replacements as well. We're trying to improve the rate by which we replace our corroding and failing lines. And I would tell you, even with a $500,000 investment from 1% compared to $2.5 million in the water fund, this is significantly helpful to apply towards the projects that Bruce and Andrew have on the horizon in replacing lines and keeping us ahead of all that crappy line that we have out there.
Got that-
Technical
got that
terms.
back? I'm
Oh,
sorry,
good. I
I
hope
lost
so.
track
That
of
was
who
a
was
good
next.
one.
You had a follow-up?
That was a good one.
I had a follow-up to that, because I've been gone for a couple of years. Where does the stormwater management fall into this, and the stormwater sewers? Is that still in this fund right now, or is that money, are those monies coming from someplace else?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, the fact is, those dollars come from somewhere else. We would like to have an enterprise that helps us manage.
I knew that,
That
but we
utility.
haven't been able to do that
That's
because
right.
because of the legislature, that we can't set one up, but
That's right.
I didn't know where we were putting that money, and that's why I was asking.
Yeah, primarily those dollars come from 1% allocations that you allow us to divert. Andrew, where else do we tap those?
Mayor, Council, you're right, we allocate some of that 3 point.
Just like we did
for
before.
streets has to go
Okay.
to storm sewer improvements, either manhole replacements or upsizing storm sewer lines or anything of that nature.
Okay.
But really more on a crisis basis than a long-term rebuild, right?
Mr. Mayor, you're absolutely correct. Storm water system is woefully underfunded.
Okay. Just like it was before. I didn't know if anything had changed in the last 2.5 years or not.
Nope.
Okay.
Nope.
Okay.
Thank you.
You bet.
Other questions
Thank you,
about
Mr. Mayor.
the sewer fund? Obviously, some significant rate increases, but it's, I mean, I agree with Bob. This is the cost of the service that people utilize. If that's what it costs us to keep it solvent.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I would also remind you that when we calculate these sewer rates, it's obviously contingent upon a water usage sort of model. We do try to project those kinds of rates based on usage that is happening at the slowest parts of the consumption 12-month cycle. So is it January, February timeframe?
Mr. Mayor, or it'll be January and February is when we take a look at your water bill and we figure that's your sewer usage for the year. So,
Right.
So basically, all the snowbirds are getting a break.
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, you're correct.
Okay. Other questions for Carter on the sewer fund? How do people feel about this plan? Are we good with going forward? Okay, looks good.
Thank you. The Belleville and Refuse Fund. The members of our community are typically interested in what happens as it relates to the fees that are charged at the curb, if you will, right? The residential rates and those kinds of things. But the fact is, the rate modeling and so forth for these two funds, bail, fill, and refuse, is actually far more complicated than that. One of the questions that I have been getting a lot of over the past 12 months is with respect to turbine blades and all that kind of thing, and how it is that those types of waste streams affect our rate and these funds and everything else. And I'm happy to report, after being educated by Cindy quite a bit, which she finds she has to do quite a bit every year for me when we get to this time of year, those blades make us a lot of money for this fund. They weigh a lot, they're long and tough to deal with, and I think we charge $75 a ton, is that right?
That's what I'm proposing, we're doing 59 right now.
59, we're asking for 75. I think it's a worthwhile increase request. Can you talk a little bit about, a lot of the questions, Council and Cindy, that I've been getting is, how is that affecting our capacity and our ability to deal with long-term waste needs, and whether or not that's being compromised? Anything you can share along those lines?
Here on Carter, as I've said to the media too, we love these kind of projects, and one of Carter's quotes is my most favorite: built it and they will come. Well, we built a special cell for what we call special waste. Well, these blades are special, and they're special in a lot of different ways. One, they're the most inert, environmentally friendly waste that we've ever received. So they really don't cause a problem, except they take up space. And his space question is, well, how long can we do this? Well, we could take turbine farms for many years without a space problem, because the council, like you, many years ago, was smart, and we bought the Stuckenough property, which is about 1,700 acres, for $200,000. I mean, most landfills have to pay millions of dollars for their land to landfill. So we're in a very fortunate situation where basically our land is free. It doesn't cost us a lot of money for the land, and we have lots of it. Tom Forsland, our former city manager, he used to tell me, don't tell the public that we have 1,000 years or more of life, because nobody can comprehend that. You know, just tell them a few hundred. Well, we have hundreds of years of life in our landfill because we have so much space. I mean, that's good for us, for special waste projects that help us with our revenue. And one of the fact sheets, these 3 turbine farms that we just got are going to generate us about $600,000. Well, I always put in the budget about $500 for special waste projects. We're really down right now in the oil field waste. We've only gotten $40,000 this year for that, but we've already got that $600,000. So I don't put in an inflated amount of revenue when I speak to Carter about that, because I really don't know what's going to come in. But when they do come in, and that $500,000 every year really helps us keep the rates low. And I know your question earlier about what we've done in the past, we've been really, really good, the city has, in both of our funds and Bruce's, about keeping rates low. I mean, we always see it in the 1 to 2 to 3%, and occasionally we'll have to go above that because of capital. But those special waste projects really help us in the landfill field not see, you know, your 5 to 10 to 15 or even your 18% like you see in gas and electrical sometimes. So we're very fortunate to have that situation here where we can take those special projects. Does that answer your question, Carter?
Beautifully.
Okay.
You
Nice.
Yay, garbage.
Other questions about the Valefield Fund?
Just
Bob?
one question, are the hubs cut off when we get them? The steel?
Yes.
Oh.
We only get fiberglass, and the
Okay.
fiberglass is only on the blade, the turbine blades, and the motor housing is fiberglass too.
Yeah, because those hubs have gotta be worth
Yeah.
considerable amount of money.
And they recycle 90% of everything on a turbine farm, with the exception of fiberglass. And one of the reasons I wanted to raise that rate so high from 59 to 75 is because the owner of the farm said, oh, you could have gotten a lot more money from us. So,
Well, they
I said,
don't have
well,
a lot
I
of other
can't-
options,
yeah,
right?
Yeah, and yeah, they don't. Nobody has as much land as we do in the state of Wyoming. And some of the Colorado people have been talking to us and said, we really don't have the space. You might be getting some Colorado farms. So, like I said, it really is a special project because
Well, I noticed they've been
fortunate
cutting them
to
in
get
3
it.
pieces.
It really helps
They've
us
been
out.
cutting them in 3 pieces lately.
We required them to cut them into
Oh.
3 pieces because we look like Tonka toys on them, and we can't crush those blades. So we tuck them inside of each other, and the landfill staff is awesome. They were so creative in figuring out how to minimize the space. I should have brought some photos. I didn't know I was going to be able to talk about it. So it's so fun for me. But they really have done a great job of minimizing the space by cutting them and tucking them inside of each other. And they're tapered, so every other one would go like that to take up less space. So pretty cool how they do that.
Your staff is awesome.
They are awesome.
They are.
Steve?
So, Are we gonna do the same thing with the non-residents as we do with our hunting licenses and charge them 10 times what we charge the residents to bring their waste in?
So you're on her. We actually do have a play, that we charge a 30% surcharge on
Okay.
garbage that comes out of county. So that is in play, and for those communities who work with us regularly, then we go under agreement to give them our rates. So yes, we do charge a surcharge.
Well, that was for out of county. I'm talking about out of state. If the Greenies
Well,
decide
you
to.
know what? We do not have an out-of-state, and we could do that, I suppose, if you proposed it, so you would charge more for out-of-state waste.
30%'s enough.
Mike?
Just out of curiosity, since you mentioned out of county, how many other remote communities and counties are we serving?
So right now, we serve Glenrock, Douglas, Bags, which is really far away, and Rollins, under contract currently. So we receive a bunch of the out-of-county at the 30% surcharge in Fremont and Campbell County when they have big special waste projects like the turbine farm that they can't handle, so.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is an example of a success story, because if you look here,
He's doing that because it's dipping below.
we really have, when you look at the tipping fee per ton in our community, to be at $50 roughly, you know, right now we're below, we're proposing to go just above that, is incredible. And the reason we can stay at this rate is because of the very things that Cindy is talking about. We are able to facilitate trash streams from outside of the county. We are able to facilitate special projects that have a nice profit margin that allow us to offset revenue that we would otherwise have to make up in this fee here. So I'm really pleased that we have a tipping fee that is so low. It does, however, require that on occasion we need to dip below our reserve line in order to make up for some of the projects that are needed with the landfill. And as you might imagine, some of those projects include not only the Baylor facility and those things that you have recently toured, but actual landfill cells. Each one of those projects are going to run us, whether we're closing or opening, about $2 to $3 million. And as you can imagine, that takes quite a bite out of this activity that this blue line represents. We try to build up when we know we got a project coming, and then when it hits us, it takes us down, and then we get to determine how fast we want our recovery rate to be in order to prepare for the next closure or the next opening. And in this circumstance, we're suggesting a fairly moderate ramp up to the next closure, but while we do have that luxury, that doesn't necessarily mean that we can't be a little more aggressive to be ready early and get started on the next opening.
Kristen and then Steve.
What is the projected, what is the projected project for 21-22? Is that a closure?
That's actually a closure, right,
Okay.
Cindy?
It's both,
Okay.
opening up a new cell and closing our first cell. So that's
Okay.
why there's such a big dip, is there's two major projects going on that year.
Okay.
All of which happens faster than it needs to because of all the grass that goes to the landfill. Would that be a fair
Yeah.
statement?
Your Honor, or that is something we need to tackle on the business plan, again, is the grass.
Which, Mr. Mayor, by the way, that business plan is actually our 10 to 20-year outlook with regard to the business activities of this fund. And we are putting together business plans that should be complete the turn of the year for the utilities that would also project business activity for the next 10 or 20 years.
If we could be a little more successful at diverting that, it would delay these costs.
Right.
So, Steve?
You know, I made the comment about the out-of-state, kind of a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but by the same token, there are a lot of these states that have the NIMBY mentality, and I don't want Wyoming to become a dumping ground for these places. If you want to promote and, oh gosh, we have to have 100% of our power from wind, well, then you need to be sucking it up and taking care of some of your own problems. So I guess I would ask you folks to really consider even more than the 30% surcharge for the out-of-state people, that if you want these things, people need to pay for it themselves, rather than pointing it off on somebody else.
Your Honor and Carter, just so you know, right now our permit only allows us to take Wyoming waste.
Oh,
So if
okay.
we actually did that, it would come back to you, and you would have to make that decision whether or not we took out-of-state waste. And at that time, you could decide to charge them whatever you want to do.
Oh, okay. I haven't read our permits.
I think we all say what, 600?
Yeah, I know.
Like, let's just,
Yeah.
I guess I'd also like to point out that while we may make money taking waste streams from other communities, we are also serving and providing an invaluable service to those communities, because maintaining a landfill in today's world is very difficult under EPA regulations, and many of them would be unable to do that. And by taking that waste, we give them an alternative and a way to basically deal with that problem. And it isn't just about making money, it's about being a good neighbor to our communities and giving them that option.
Oh, and I'm all for it. And don't get me wrong,
No,
I'm all for helping
yeah,
the Wyoming people.
Not
Okay.
debating that, but I'm just saying this is a good thing in many ways that we're doing. And we can process it properly and effectively and safely and according to EPA regs. So, other questions, comments about this? How do people feel about this plan? Carter, anything
Mr.
else
Mayor,
you want to say?
Before we actually decide on the bail field, though, I do think we need to talk about the refuse fund, because the fact that we're the biggest customer here, and obviously adjusting these one way or the other will impact what it is that the people pay for at the curb, and that is not something we have seen yet. So unless you have other questions about this fund, I would ask that you hold on the decision yet till you see what it looks like on the refuse side of this equation, so you know what the residential impact is for the actual utility bill that your typical customer would receive. Yeah, that's right.
Before we leave this graph, if we went back, it would just look like this, wouldn't it? There would be ups and downs as these cells had to be created and closed over the years, right?
Mr. Mayor, that would be true about the blue line here, but if you were to look further back, you would see the black line and the green line leveling out at a lower rate in previous iterations of the fund's policy approach to reserves and its corresponding margin of favorability. But yes, I would say that's probably accurate, wouldn't you, Cindy?
Absolutely.
5 or 6 years they last typically?
Yes,
Okay.
that's correct also.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? You want to go on to that other
If we
fund
could.
then, Carter?
who has the energy to put the grass clippings in a garbage bag and take it forward?
The refuse fund, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. Okay, this line is green, so that's freaking me out a little bit here. And this line
Say
is
you
red.
changed the color scheme.
So I'm having to adjust my way of thinking here. So I can talk to it without looking at it. How about that? This is supposed to be black, and this is supposed to be the green line. The blue line is appropriately colored. We are operating within that margin of favorability, as you can see here with the refuse fund. Now, in my estimation, the refuse fund really is for the purpose of creating that accounting entity that allows us to pay our bill on behalf of the citizens that we dump for, if you will, at the scale with the bail fill. So the refuse fund helps us to sort of conceptualize what it is that we have to charge our customers, our citizens and so on a monthly basis in the form of utility bill in order for us to pay the tipping fee to deposit their trash, if you will, into the landfill. So what we're suggesting here, if we could move up here, Tom, is we are suggesting a 4% and 1% increase over the next 2 years, which means that we're looking at about 50 cents to 66 cents over the next couple of years, our 2-year outlook, if you will, in order to help make up for that tipping cost that we have to dump that trash on our citizens' behalf. So you can see that would mean with what we've recommended in the bail fill, okay, which was about $1 or so for the per ton tipping fee, that's going to result in a monthly cost to our more typical resident in this neighborhood around $17. Which again, I would tell you, having paid that bill in other communities around the state, that really is a very competitive rate. Now, were we to decide to lower the increase on the tipping fee or increase the suggested rate beyond what we proposed, that obviously would have an up or down effect on what it is that people pay at the curb. Okay, I wanted to show that relationship to you before you decided whether or not that bail fill increase ought to take place in regards to what we're suggesting. But as far as this is concerned, that's a very optimal sort of behavioral pattern for this fund, in my opinion.
Carter, I don't know if this is on topic or not, but we've been concerned as we went through the staff reductions that started in 2015. Did we go too far? Are we asking too much of our people by operating with far fewer staff? I assume that these cost projections, would I be correct in assuming that these cost projections are including what you perceive as necessary refills or returning positions into the city that maybe we eliminated or suspended, but have since found out that we maybe need those? Would that be a fair question to ask during this discussion?
What I would tell you is this is representative of what it is that Cindy thinks ought to happen by way of staffing increases and so on over the next couple of years. I haven't totally bought off on that yet. So her and I haven't had that conversation, Andrew and I haven't had that conversation yet to be able to say we should add this staff or not add this staff or whatever.
And my question is really about, the entire presentation. I assume you're trying to marry those discussions because staff is obviously the highest cost that we have.
Absolutely. One thing that I would tell you though, in each of these funds, what you do see in many of our operational cost increases and so on is as a result of the reinstatement, if you will, of the wage, the 5% wage increases over time for those newer employees that are still in that band. We did build those costs in there, and that is, for the most part, particularly on the very operational level, the impetus behind some of that inflation that you see if you were to look deeper into these spreadsheets. But yes, we are trying to accommodate staffing needs and increases where they're necessary, but the fact is we wouldn't be building any of those increases into staff levels and FTE rates without your approval.
Other questions?
Thanks for the question. That's a good question.
Other questions on refuse collection fund? Comfortable with that one? Is that making sense to everyone?
Are we ready?
Okay, sure.
On both.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah. On both? Right?
On both, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not hearing any objections or significant concerns from anyone, so looks
Well,
like you guys did your homework.
Thank you, and I really appreciate Andrew and his team and Tom and his team for making all this happen. They crunch a lot of numbers and a lot of data to help me understand what's going on and be able to communicate it.
Steve? Carter, if I can ask, so with these increases, can you say what the increase is gonna be then for a typical household, taking all these into consideration? How much of an increase per month are we talking on average?
Well, if you look kind of working backwards,
Combined?
Just on this one.
the sort of the cumulative value, I assume you're saying, right?
Yeah, of all of them that we just give the thumbs up to?
We're looking about 50 cents, if you will, for the sanitation customers. If I remember correctly. Oh, thank you.
Oh, look at that.
So this would be a cumulative number right here too, right, Tom? Over 2 years?
Correct, this would be fiscal 20, which in January, that's when the first one will take effect.
Okay.
And this would be the next, second year of the 2-year proposal.
So over 2 years, is it fair to say that it would be a $5.50 a month impact?
That's per
No,
year.
Or a $9.
It'd be $9.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Gotcha.
So a $9 total over the 2 years?
Over the 2 years.
Okay, and then if I understood you right, we're setting those for the next 2 years, but you can come back at the end of next year, and if an adjustment needs to be made, we can still make an adjustment.
Absolutely. We plan to be in front of you next year, maybe not with as an elaborate a presentation, but certainly hitting the high points to say, here's where we think we're doing well, here's where we think we're doing poorly. We may want to consider adjustments accordingly. Yep, absolutely.
Can we do one of these for electrons?
I'd like to.
I would too.
Any other questions on utilities and rates? I think we're all good with this then, so I think we can move on. Nice
All
work.
right, thank you very much.
Nice work, everyone. Okay, are we ready to talk about downtown parking fines?
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
Thanks, Cindy.
Oh, absolutely. Always fun to talk garbage.
Top trash.
We got Carter to add in the.
Are you
points,
trash
like-
talking as a kid that
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, pursuant to the direction that council provided a number of weeks ago, wherein council has suggested that moving forward with parking meters and so forth isn't the right idea for us at this point in time. We have taken that direction and we've consulted the downtown parking plan, if you will, and tried to outline the course of action that we need to pursue accordingly. We have had the opportunity to visit with the Downtown Casper Business Association. We've had the opportunity to visit with the DDA. We've also been able to have internal conversations with the judge and with the chief and the community development director. I feel like we've got a really good plan moving forward that all the stakeholders that I just discussed with you seem to be on board with. And as you know, that's nice to have that collaboration and that sort of uniformity in our buy-in. The chief has gotten to the point now where he feels as though he is in a good position with his CSOs to ramp up the enforcement downtown and deal with parking in a much more appropriate manner. I think the chief said we have 3 on the street now and 1 that's just about to be out there, which really is a much better situation than we've had in recent years in trying to keep that core filled and operating. Furthermore, the judge has given direction with regard to what she'd like to see in the form of ramping up the accountability for those that receive parking citations downtown and I would assume anywhere else in our community, wherein she has discussed the medium by which our tickets should be delivered. Right now, they're delivered in a paper form where they're stuck kind of under the windshield wiper, and we aren't convinced that those pieces of paper stay intact with the car and the person receiving that citation. So we are going to move to what I call a sticky medium that looks more like what you'd see with the highway patrol, wherein it's going to stick to the window and be real clear and present, if you will, as it relates to people receiving those citations and being noticed to be in violation. Where we see those folks repeat in their offense from a parking standpoint, the chief and I have concluded with the judge's blessing as well that indeed we plan to make a must appear sort of request to those who are just chronic offenders, and they will have to answer to the judge in regards to why that seems to be a problem and a repeating sort of situation. I appreciate that that we are ramping up what it is by way of enforcing these issues downtown. And I certainly appreciate that the business owners downtown who have said that the parking meters are not the right solution seem to be very much in accord with the idea that the ramped up enforcement and the more certitude as it relates to citing our offenders in that direction we're going. So I'm really pleased to report that that everybody seems to be on the same page, and that indeed those who have used the downtown public streets as sort of their parking plan may need to adjust what it is that they would want to do in terms of securing longer term parking. We also have the, I guess you'd call it parking ticket module coming online, which will help us to be much more effective in dealing with this data that we collect as it relates to license plates that we capture and everything else. You all know that we're trying to implement and are going through a major implementation with the Tyler product. They do have a parking citation product that seems to be doing exactly what we need, and once it's fully implemented, we're confident that that'll help us build the right data and the appropriate data to you know, deal with citations much more effectively and in a manner that doesn't confuse who and what and when and all those kinds of things. So I'm really pleased with the direction we're going, and I really appreciate the work that the PD and that municipal court is doing to help us get to this point. Our downtown business owners seem to be in support and applauding the direction we're going, and so we wanted to let you know what we're doing and what's happening. But we also want to come back and talk to you further about the parking garage and the way in which we think the parking garage can be a more effective solution as well for another time, if we could.
Questions for Carter? Sean?
Are you talking about those big red stickers you put on the windows of the cars that are really hard to get off of people's windows?
Chief, could you discuss that a little more closely?
Right.
So there are product, Mayor, Council, there are products that we can purchase. They cost roughly $1 a piece. They come with a removable adhesive bag that is not, you have to scrape it off with a razor blade. They're able to come off. They come in different formats. Some of them even include a payment envelope that they just take the top off. They put in their payment and fold the top over and mail it, and it goes directly to the municipal court with a signed avowal that I plead guilty and want to pay the fine. They come in a variety of options. We're not talking the ones that can't be removed that would be a safety hazard. However, you know, we want to make sure that those people that are held accountable had just cause to be aware that they had been ticketed. So if it's 45 miles an hour wind blowing downtown through those buildings, that, you know, there can't be an argument that it blew away and I wasn't aware. So we're trying to meet the happy medium. I was researching it out today, and I found that generally the ones I've used in my past had adhesive on the top, but I was able to find a mass-produced product that runs about 98 cents a piece that has adhesive on the top and the bottom, but it's adhesive similar to a Post-it note that would, you know, hopefully hold in our wind, but not pose a problem for the person getting in their car and driving home.
Another question, Your Honor. Can we look, or have we looked at mailing tickets instead of putting them on vehicles? Because, and the reason I ask is because the ticket is issued to the registered owner of the vehicle, and it's not out of the ordinary to loan your car out or have a teenager drive a car that is registered in your name, and they get a ticket and decide, well, I'm not gonna pay this, and not tell me about it, and then the warrant is issued to the registered owner. So, I wanna make sure that the registered owners are getting the tickets, so can we or have we looked at mailing those directly to the registered owner so they know that this ticket was issued to this vehicle?
Do you have any insight on that, Chief?
Mayor, I'm going to defer to the judge in just a second. Council, one of the things that's important to me is I need a visual deterrent. I need people to see us issuing tickets. I need to have people walking by. I need employees walking by going, oh man, they're issuing tickets. I need to go move my car. So there's a happy medium here, but I think that the process that we're laying out holds the owner accountable for it, but it gives the owner the opportunity to provide information as to who the actual offender is, to work with us. But as it currently exists, it's a civil penalty against the owner.
Right, which it's not always the owner driving the vehicle, is my issue with that.
Just a quick comment on the memo. I was pleasantly surprised to see that the 80% use rate of the parking garage, 80% of capacity. Because we hear time and time again that nobody parks there. Well,
Right.
somebody must be parking there if it's 80% at capacity.
Well, they've worked hard to make it a more visually attractive facility and brighter, and hopefully that's rippling through the community, that it's a safe place to park.
I did have one more question. Are we still chalking tires?
Beginning in January, we will be bringing online our Brazos system, and that is going to be a photographic evidence-based one. So we'll get that initial picture, and then more than 2 hours later, we'll get a picture of the unmoved vehicle in its current state. Currently, I can't verify that we've been issuing tickets out for the last little while. I can't verify that we're chalking. We may be doing we already possess those mobile devices, and we may be using those already. Brazos, the full digital version of it, should be completed and active in January.
The reason I ask is I saw a case in the federal court that said that chalking is a Fourth Amendment violation, so make sure that we're complying with that ruling, or if it even applies to our area, I don't know.
If I may comment, the police department has a bona fide interest in not damaging people's property, so the system that we're going to absolves us of any need to mark. We can be so definitive in our prosecution that we actually capture the area on the tire that the valve stem is located when parked. To, if we need to get that serious about it, this system allows us to do that. And we will make those judgments as we proceed through the court proceedings. And, people that are held more and more accountable, the ones that refuse to be obedient to the laws, they'll be the ones that will be trying to get creative on it. But I think the judge is well situated to help us achieve our community goals.
I just want to make sure that we're compliant with court rulings.
Anything else for the chief or Carter before we ask Judge Lynn? Would you like to tell us what do you think we can do to make the system work better?
Yeah, Mayor, Council. So basically the issue that we've had is, again, staffing. Now that the chief is going to be able to fully complement, I think we're going to be in a really good position with Carter's suggestion of the sticky media, because 90% of the complaints that I got is, I never saw this ticket. The other complaint I got that I feel like we've worked well with the police department in remedying is where somebody has sold a vehicle, left the plates on, but there was a press release that went out and that dropped to almost nothing. So very, very, very rarely do I ever hear that anymore with regards to, I sold this vehicle, left the plates on. So that pretty much eliminated that. So I am absolutely in support of using the sticky medium on there. I think that once people see that, then they really can't get around the wind blew it off. As far as the mailing of the citations, it's my opinion that we can't really do that because that's not in accordance, in my opinion, with the rules. So basically what we've been doing now is if there's a citation, somebody fails to appear for court, I'm assuming that they did not receive the citation. So I'm turning around and doing a summons instead of a warrant so that we can ensure that proper notice is given to the individual so that we're not issuing a warrant arbitrarily. I think a lot of that will be remedied with the sticky medium, is that really people can't come in and say that. However, we'll kind of just feel it out, see how it goes. If we need to make a modification in our procedure, we will absolutely do that, because you know, I don't want people that are, you know, driving somebody else's vehicle to be like, well, I didn't know that my son went down and parked 15 times and now I've got a warrant in front of you. But I also think that the police department does a good enough job with trying to contact people, making somebody's around. They do a lot of reach out, so I think that that won't become an issue. So if it does, then we'll proceed accordingly.
Questions for Judge Lund? Have you done any thinking about how we'll define a chronic violator, what the number of tickets, or at what point will we put it in that bucket?
Well, I think it's probably just, so in the rules of criminal procedure, it's basically officer discretion when they issue a citation, make it must appear. So I think it depends on facts and circumstances that we leave up to the officer at this juncture. You know, if we have somebody that, you know, they cut brakes to, and then they're down there every single day, you know, then that's a way bigger issue. And they can come in, and if the officer testifies to that, you know, they might get a larger fine than somebody that's been down there twice. But, or somebody down there that maybe has been angry with the officer, or blatantly disrespectful to what, you know, us as a community is trying to accomplish. So it'll just be case by case, look at every fact and circumstance, let the testimony kind of speak to that.
Because we keep hearing that there are like 15 or 20 chronic violators down there that just aren't going to change until they're forced to. I guess if this system would address that, that would really free things up.
It's got to be a step in the right direction. At least we've gotten rid of the dog ate my homework excuse. So.
I just want to create an atmosphere where people just say it's not worth it. It's just not worth it. And then we wouldn't have to talk about this anymore.
Are the fines changing, or are they still the same?
So they'll remain the same, and then basically when they do a must appear, so when somebody comes in, I just advise them that they're misdemeanors, carry with them maximum penalties. And then just as I do on any case, you know, we have a kind of a bond schedule where it's just said if they want to come in and pay it. But then we can increase based on facts and circumstances of a particular case. So they're going to remain the same, but if we have a chronic violator, then as I do in all other cases, if we have somebody that is not understanding, not abiding by the law, then the fine moves up with each time or each circumstance, depending on, you know, the very particular circumstances of each case.
Just as discretion rather than a graduated schedule, because we did talk about a graduated schedule at one point, didn't we? Where the first violation would be this much.
I want to cover the 98 cents for the new stickers.
Right. And, well, and all the staffing that we're now having to pay for. So, but that's not something we want to consider at this point, is that graduated schedule.
What is the fine now for the typical overtime parking?
So we got $15 tickets, we got $25 tickets, we have $100 tickets for, is it handicapped, and then we have expired plates is 100, which I'd like to bring that more in line with the improper registration that we write when they're driving. But other than that, like $15.
And then we'll have a discussion later about the garage and whether we could reduce rates for employees down there, how that would affect the DDA's operation and their budget for the garage. Is that on our work session agenda?
That would be something we need direction in terms of docketing, but yes, that's the proposal that we'd come back to you on.
Other questions for Judge Lund or Chief or Carter? Is everybody okay with moving forward with this? I think it's great. Appreciate your efforts, Chief. I mean, that's what people have been calling for, is just increased enforcement. And maybe having a discussion about parking meters got everybody serious about let's go for this. So, especially the downtown owners. Okay, everybody's good with this? Okay. Agenda setting for, let's see. Well, let's look at next week first and make sure everything's looking okay to everyone? Give everybody a minute to take some time to look at it.
I won't be here.
Did anyone have any questions about the information Carter provided to us on the annexation and the information that was provided to the owners? And there were some objections last week, although they were pretty non-specific.
Mr. Mayor, do we still want to have a discussion of a privatization of Okanagan? And we have that.
Well, I'm
proposed
looking
work
at next
session?
week right now.
Okay, all right.
So we'll talk about what to put on the
Okay.
work session
Yeah.
after we're done with this. I just wanna make sure the optional 1% trails trust allocation, is that something we've already talked about?
Mr. Mayor,
Carter?
this is the contract for the Trails Trust to use the 1 cent $16 that y'all allocated.
Okay.
This is really just a formal step to put that money into action for them.
Excuse me.
People need another minute to look at it, or don't wanna rush anybody, there's a lot in there.
Where do we stand on the DeWalt divide?
Well, we passed on second reading, so.
I know, third reading is coming up.
Right. Well, I think we were taking the position that it was two separate matters, that the replatting was non-controversial, but that we would deal with the Quonset hut as a separate matter, if I'm remembering correctly, that we were trying not to keep those
Okay.
Connected to each other.
Okay.
Ken?
I thought you said before third reading, he has to agree to the contract that he had regarding that, so I'm assuming that got signed?
No, you would be wrong about that. I
Oh.
will take that off of it. I will advise you of some of these things in our executive session.
Oh, okay.
Because really, the clause was really just, I thought it was just to alert him that this could be something that we could land in court. I thought, that's the way I read it, without threatening or anything, it was just saying, you may as well know this.
Sounds like it's coming up shortly, so.
Yeah, okay.
We'll move
All right.
on.
Good enough. All right, if there's no other questions, we'll move on to scheduling and Bob's question about what needs to be on. So, we've already scheduled the 14th, correct?
Nope, that's what we're doing.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, that is what we need to do.
We've got some
So
items
that's all blank.
suggested, yeah.
Okay. All right, so what would people like to add to the 14th?
I would recommend that I add the staff recommended items.
Okay. And that is what, hour and 10 minutes roughly? Anything else people are itching to get to? I'm hoping, I mean, it'll be serious when we get to the property code revisions. And that's a big item that we will need to take on at some point. And so I guess we can talk about that on the because we never did schedule that. Okay. All right. Well, I mean, we'll talk about that on the 14th to see if and when we want to get to that. And then on the 14th, I guess we can discuss whether we want to talk any more about privatization. What was your concern, Bob?
Privatization of Hogadon. We don't have any numbers to even put out an RFP to do that until we have some snow under our belt with a new light and so forth. And I'm just thinking, you know, it's certainly something we can do someday, but anybody that would want to come in, they say, okay, you got a new building, you got half of last year and half of this year. We're just not in a position to even say whether somebody would even be interested in doing it. So I'm not sure that doing that, you know, putting it in January is going to really do anything for us.
Well, and I'd kind of like to piggyback onto that. I think what we need to look at and talk about there is not, okay, privatization versus this or that, but, you know, what are we gonna do? You know, are we gonna continue operating with the lift was inadequate when it was installed, it was poorly designed when it was installed, or with, you know, upgrading the lift facilities, upgrading other things? I think also that, you know, the idea of these other activities up there, you know, people seem to want to talk about those. In my humble opinion, most of those proposals, like zip lines, all these other things, they're just dreams that are not going to be a viable thing in that facility. But though, you know, rather than talking about privatization and this and that and everything, I think we need to have a whole picture discussion about that.
You know, I'm fine with deferring it. All I was suggesting, I wasn't suggesting that we start down that road. I was suggesting that we have a discussion about whether we even wanted to contact some potential operators to see if there's an appetite to even look at it. So it wasn't about, let's put an RFP together. It was, do we want to even start a conversation about whether
and I really appreciate where you're coming from with that, Mr. Mayor, because I do think that we need to, you know, that we need to be open to a lot of different options. But I'd just like to see that format in a, you know, in a broad, big picture format instead of just looking at little pictures.
Yeah, I think that's what I had in mind, really, was to kind of step back and say.
Oh, maybe I misinterpreted what it said.
Yeah, I didn't intend for us to make any big decisions in that discussion. It was just to start kicking around some ideas and seeing if it's even an idea worth pursuing. So,
Mr. Mayor, I think to dovetail with what Councilman Huber is saying, if we are going to take kind of a broader look at Hogadon and how it works and whether, you know, what we should do kind of moving forward, I think we have to have the conversation about our lease relationships that we have up there as well. Because indeed, as has been mentioned before, if we really want to try to reduce that subsidy, I think we have to really consider the ways we can honestly make money up there. And we give a lot of that away right now. So I think we're going to have that circumspect conversation. We probably ought to include that too.
that was part of the intent, was to really step back and look at, you know, what else could we do with the facility? Now that it's built up the way we wanted it to be built up, what's its future? So, and I'm not insisting that we have that discussion on the 28th of January or whenever, but I just want to make sure that we sort of keep it on the back burner and maybe start getting other people to think about possibilities. So, but all we really need to do tonight is plan the 14th. So, Ken?
How long would it take for the neighborhood infrastructure redevelopment going on? Would that need a lot of time?
I'm not sure what that refers to, this one here.
Mr. Mayor, Councilman Bates, that's probably more of a capital discussion. Okay. And so I would guess we'd want to talk to that closer to the time of, you know, when we're developing that capital agenda.
Okay.
Like would we want to propose an LAD as a thinking?
Maybe, or we just focus on a neighborhood where we know the infrastructure is just really deplorable and needs help more than others, you know.
I know of some
Yeah, absolutely.
Anything else need to be added on the 14th? Looks like a pretty short meeting if we do it this way, but if there's no other burning issues people want to get to, we can just leave it the way it's done right now, highlighted section. Okay. All right, that sounds like, I'm not hearing anybody else adding anything, so let's just leave it the way it is, and we'll do those staff suggested items. Okay, legislative review. Do we have anything to tell people about, Carter?
Mr. Mayor, other than to say that I think everybody's gotten the invitation with respect to our legislative dinner for the 23rd of January.
No.
No? Okay. We're in the process of setting that schedule, and we're looking for what it is that the legislators have available pursuant to their committee assignments and everything else. And it appears as though the 23rd is standing out as being an optimal date. So if you could look at your calendars and be prepared to let us know whether or not that'll work for you. I think that's going to be probably ideal for the legislators to everybody sit down with and hit them up with regard to what our legislative agenda needs to look like.
Well, that worked good at Fort Casper. That's about the right size room to do that.
Great. Good. Good. Okay. Fair enough.
That'd be evening type?
Yes, sir. It'd be a dinner, basically.
Was it? It was at the event center last year, right?
Last year it was at the event center.
Okay.
That's right.
Oh, that's right, yeah, it's like a forecast, yeah.
We've done it.
We did it both places, yeah, so,
That's
okay.
right.
Anything else we should know about heading into the session? I can't think of any other committee meetings that, I know I didn't attend any.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, let's go around the table. Ken, do you have anything to tell us about?
The only thing that I have, it's more a conversation with you, but just to bring it up to council. I work for the transportation for the school district, and Sid Webb, my boss, he brought up an idea to try to work with not only the city, the county, and the other city, Mills, Barna, Evansville, so forth. That this last snowstorm, not this last one, the real bad one, we had, I think, like 15, 16 buses that got stuck on going to pick up kids. And we're talking about the big buses that got stuck going down in the roads. And what he just brought up as an idea is when we do look at putting in new neighborhoods and we look at bus stops, of doing a cutout for the city buses, for the transportation buses, where they could just pull in, pick up, citizens of Casper or the students, and then carry on out on plowed roads, because those are gonna be main roads that are plowed, and that's where they will just put, in a sense, the student's bus stop is at those specific spots that are cut out and get back on the road that's plowed. So it eliminates any buses from really being stuck. Any development that we're looking at redoing, if they do have a bus stop, maybe looking at doing cutouts that's sizable for every bus, and looking at some of the bus stops, and from that point of view, I think that would be smart. City-wise, helping out transportation. So he just asked me to bring that up. That's more discussion with you, but I thought that may come to be. He may want to ask, speak to council, kind of give his idea to see if city would get behind that as well. So I thought I'd just throw that out to you guys. And then it's not legislative, but this Thursday breakfast, right?
Yes.
We'll be serving the city employees. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yep. So I just wanted
Great
to
event.
remind that there. So yeah, I will be attending. So anyways, that's it.
I may have a cater meeting, I have to double check on that. Kristen?
Just a congratulations to the city, and thank you for everyone on their hard work on getting the Pilots Association and our selection as being one of the locations. seems like a really big deal for the city, so.
It was Advanced Casper. They just had, on the Joint Powers Board, they just did a great job recruiting that. Steve?
Is there any, excuse me, is there any way we can put pressure on YDOT to fix Yellowstone between whatever the first block west of Beverly, all the way down to the bridge, just past the on-ramp onto I-25, particularly going eastbound? Because right, do what?
Outside lane.
Yes, the outside lane. I mean, if you're driving a small car, you will lose it in the potholes that are there. I mean, it's atrocious. Do what?
I said, I don't know exactly where that is, so maybe tell me after this.
But, yeah, it's atrocious through there. I mean, and even when I drive through there with my dually, I can't get over far enough to miss them, and I'm missing a filling or two.
I wonder if they have that slated as part of the bridge removal project.
Could be. I can
No,
find out more.
this isn't even a part of that. This is before.
I know, but I'm just
Yeah,
wondering if that might
but-
be a
That's what I was
package
wondering,
deal
if we're
that.
tying them together when you
But
repave.
still, they
There's
need
gonna
to
have
fix
be some
those.
alignment.
They've got to do something with those potholes, because they literally are, well, it's where the curb gutter and the asphalt start, and they're right there, and they're out already about this far into the driving lane.
It's on your list, right?
Yes, sir, absolutely, I'll follow up.
Thank
Anything
you.
else, Steve?
No, that was,
Nothing tonight, thank you.
Great.
I know we're in a work session, but I wanted to reiterate, I know you sent out an email about that article that came out about the snowplow and so forth. I just want to reiterate, and I think I'm going to say it again next week at our public meeting, the continued support for our workers. I don't think anybody realizes the amount of time they put in away from their families and the work that they do to keep the roads clear. And it frustrates me to no end that I think that it's, you know, when you see the outliers here and there that complain and say, and I'm not saying anything specifically about that situation per se, but it just frustrates me to no end the work that those those people that are plowing day and night. And if you and I ran into each other that other day at Best Buy, and you knew that the storm was coming, and you said they were preparing, and they work day and night for I don't know how long. So I just want to make sure that they know that we support them and that they're recognized for the hard work that they do. It's just very frustrating from our end to do that.
I bet there's a high correlation between the people who complain and people who don't shovel their own walk, so people can walk by their
That's probably
house.
true, Charlie.
It's easier to get around on the streets walking than it is on sidewalks.
But I will be making a statement again at our public meeting, making sure that people know that, because I think it's going to be probably a little bit harsher of a winter than we've seen probably in years. So just want to make sure they're supported. So, but I appreciate your email too, by the way.
Yeah. Well said. Anything else?
No,
Mike?
that's it.
Well, I had a great vacation and I didn't want to come home. But, okay.
Can I borrow that for a minute?
But probably a lot of people would think that'd be an improvement if I just left. Especially when if the school district comes and complains to us about plow the streets so our buses can get around better, I'm gonna look them square in the face and say, go back to neighborhood schools and quit driving those damn buses at the state's expense from one end of town clear to the other end for all of the variety of reasons that they do
It's really
that.
hard to
not-
find somebody who supports that idea.
Yeah.
Call us no day.
They're not complaining about not plowing the streets.
No, well, I understand the
Yeah,
specific
at all.
point that you were getting at, but if they weren't carting kids from clear out west of Robertson Road to clear out east of town, they wouldn't be having all those problems. Well behaved
The
now.
parents have to match the school to the learning approach of their child.
We're like the only city in the world that doesn't, so.
So you running for school board next year?
I'm just running for Mr. Popularity.
Oh, I can tell.
Clearly.
Mayor-elect. Back on the, just annexation for a second, and back on your comments last week, we did do a media story on it after last week's meeting about people hooked to city water living in the county and when they'd have to be annexed in. I did follow up with the title company, just as it had been done by staff, that they do in fact have title easement or annexation commitments that are recorded, and those do go in title commitments that go out to realtors. But where I'm headed with this is I actually had 2 realtors contact me that after they saw that story, they had no clue. They were like, you know, we're missing a boat on this. And so I did put that out through our multi-list system, which goes out to all the realtors, basically just lining out that they need to be paying attention that if you do have a property hooked up to city services, but they are in the county, that there is a possibility that there's one of those commitments in place and that they need to make sure that that information is passed on. So I actually had a couple people ask about that, and so it's out to them. What they do with it is up to them, but it's out to them. So.
But at least it's out there.
It's out
You,
there.
you can lead the horse to the water.
Right.
Anything else? Sure. Nothing for me. I just want to echo Kristen's comments that was really big news about the flyover. And again, it's a group that receives a lot of criticism, and I think most of it is unjust. But here's evidence of what that money that we give to them every year does for this community. So I think that it's a wise investment for us to farm that out to a private agency that can do things in a much different way than a city government office could ever do as far as the economic development for our community. So Advanced Casper really scored a big win for us here. Do you want to add something?
Just really quick, I was gonna say, I feel like every other day I look, just huge kudos to the event center. I feel like they are knocking it out of the park, getting like bigger name events and just one after the other. I mean, this morning I think they announced
Yes.
Josh Turner.
Yes.
Right? Or maybe not this morning, but yeah, I mean that's huge.
Well, and they're able to do that, and because it's a critical mass thing, they're able to do that if the last concert was successful,
Yeah.
because all of these, they pay very close attention to how many people are in the seats, and that's part of the recruitment process, is when they have a success, it breeds more success. And I did talk to Brad Murphy, you know, and clearly they are making progress
Yeah.
as far as turning things around financially. And so maybe we should have him come in at some point and give us a little update, because it'd be nice to hear some positive news about how that subsidy is gradually being knocked down. So, okay, we are turning into, give me some instructions here, floor.
I can give you.
Yeah, I just, oh, it's underneath there, there we go. I got it. Let's turn the page.
Get rid of you.
Okay. All right, I now call the December 10, 2019 special council meeting to order. All council members are present. The chair would entertain a motion to, by minute action, establish December 10, 2019 as the public hearing date for the submission of a Wyoming Business Council Community Enhancement Grant in an amount up to $500,000 for the First Street Gateway project.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Councilman Cathy, seconded by Councilwoman Lutz. Any abstentions or nay votes? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right, the chair would entertain a motion to adjourn from the, oh, wait.
Nope.
Yeah.
They print them on two-sided paper.
Chair would entertain a motion.
Thank you, Vice Chair.
Second reading, an ordinance to amend section 2.04.040 of the Casper Municipal Code pertaining to the salary of the mayor.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Councilman Pacheco, seconded by Councilman Hopkins. Is there anyone here to speak on this matter this evening? Okay. Any discussion amongst council? Any amendments? All in favor say aye.
Abstain. Aye.
And Councilman Friel abstained. Any nay votes?
Aye.
2 nay votes? Councilman Vice Mayor Johnson and Councilman Bates voted nay, okay? So we can record that vote. And we had 6 Yays, 2 nays, and 1 abstention, so the vote passes. Okay. A notice of an executive session to take place at this date and during this meeting was given. We have matters to discuss regarding litigation and personnel. Therefore, the chair would entertain a motion to adjourn into executive session, and at the conclusion of that executive session to reconvene this special meeting solely for the purpose of adjournment of this special meeting.
So moved.
Second.
By Councilman Creel, seconded by Vice Mayor Johnson. There being a majority of members present and a motion to adjourn into executive session having been moved and seconded, and that motion requiring 2/3 majority of the council present, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, motion passes. A greater than 2/3 majority of the council present voted in favor of the motion. We are hereby adjourned into an executive session.